Hi, I'm Judge VanDyke and welcome to my chambers. I'm making this video as part of my opinion in the Duncan v. Bonta case. In this case, the state of California made the argument, which the majority has now accepted, that a magazine holding more than 10 rounds is just an accessory, not an arm protected by the Second Amendment's right of the people to keep and bear arms. I think anyone with a basic familiarity with firearms could show you that this attempted distinction is simply inconsistent with reality. I alluded to this during oral argument when I asked California's counsel about the balance of the tests that it proposed for what qualifies as an arm protected by the Second Amendment. Let's go to that exchange now.
Can I ask you a question about that? Because
yes, Your Honor.
So the way you're treating magazines, it seems like you could use the same sort of rationale as between a non-semi-automatic firearm, say a lever action or a bolt action or a revolver type action, and a semi-automatic firearm. So I'm trying to figure out if you're saying, well, what we do is we say, have people ever banned particularly dangerous rounds? And now we're saying large capacity magazines are particularly dangerous. Why couldn't that same reasoning be used to ban semi-automatic firearms altogether? To say, because I mean, think about it, like during the Revolutionary War, if the United States had semi-automatic firearms that only held 5 to 10 rounds, it'd have been about 10 minutes and it would have been over, right, as against muskets. So clearly, the semi-automatic mechanism is way more particularly dangerous than the difference, the delta between a 10-round magazine and a 15-round magazine. So why does your reasoning not mean that, if this reasoning works, why does your reasoning not mean that a state could just ban the semi-automatic firearms altogether?
So if we're just start talking, Your Honor, about this initial sort of textual question, I think if you're dealing with a semi-automatic, that would fit the definition of an arm.
No, but that semi-automatic could be a revolver. Like it could be, I mean, just like this, that high-capacity magazine could be a lower-capacity magazine.
Right, Your Honor. So I think that would fit the definition of arm, and then you'd move on to the other aspects of the Bruin analysis. At stage one, is a particular weapon that's being addressed by the law in the tradition of dangerous and unusual? Is it in common use for self-defense? And we think Heller is clear that has to consider the character as well as the numbers.
I'm not understanding your, I think I'm missing your response to my, it seems to me that just as you could say, are you saying that yes, so it would be an arm under, you're not conceding that it would be an arm under stage one. So why are you saying it wouldn't be an arm, but the semi-automatic versus revolver, say, distinction is something that we're stuck with? I mean, you would agree that you can't ban the automatic mechanism.
Well, an automatic mechanism, I think that you can ban. I think the Supreme Court has recognized that.
No, the automatic mechanism is a term that semi-autos and full autos use an automatic mechanism.
Sure, Your Honor. I'm sorry for the confusion. No, I don't think that we could ban all semi-automatic weapons. I think Heller makes that clear. The point I was just making is, with respect to accessories, I think we have a difference of opinion where my friends suggest any accessory that is somehow helpful to armed self-defense.
So that's important, because your argument turns on whether you can characterize accessory. So you would say that the revolver versus semi-automatic is not an accessory, but that a magazine is this accessory. So what would you think about like a red dot sight, electro-optics, which many firearms are going to electronic optics nowadays. They're obviously an accessory because you could have iron sights. Could you ban those?
Well, so, Your Honor, I'm not intimately familiar with that, and I do want to answer this question and make sure that I save time for rebuttal. I think that the question at the outset would be, is that, if it's an accessory, is it within the Teixeira principle that it's necessary to the realization of the right to self-defense? And you'd have to build a record and analyze it in that case.
Now, from this exchange, it became clear to me that many, including both California's counsel and my colleagues in the majority in this case, lack the basic familiarity with firearms to understand the inherent shortcomings and obvious inadmissibility of the test that California was proposing, and which the majority in this case has now adopted. I originally planned to explain all of this in writing, in my opinion, and why the argument doesn't make sense, but it occurred to me that in this instance, showing is much more effective than telling. As the old saying goes, a picture is sometimes worth 1,000 words, and here I hope you will agree that a video is at least worth that much. And I suppose at this point in the video is as good a time as any to apologize for any shortcomings of the video. This is the first video like this that I've ever made, and in our digital age, I fear that people have become accustomed to a production quality that I'm sure that I fall far short of. But I hope and expect that regardless of any such flaws, this video will still powerfully serve the purpose for which I've made it. I also want to emphasize that for safety purposes, I have rendered inoperable all the guns and gun parts that I use to demonstrate today. And finally, as an appellate body, it's obviously not our role to make factual determinations, so I share this not to supplement the factual record that we're using to decide this case. Instead, I share this because a rudimentary understanding of how guns are made, sold, used, and commonly modified makes obvious why California's proposed test and the one my colleagues are adopting today simply does not work. I'm sure I could explain all of this in writing without being accused of improper fact-finding, but it's obviously much more effective to simply show you. So let's do that now. Welcome back. To demonstrate, I'm going to start with this SIG P320 that's basically in its stock configuration. That is, this gun is basically in the same configuration it would come to you from the manufacturer and be sold to you at a retailer. This is one of the most popular handguns currently on the market in the United States. And so I'm going to use this to point out some of the essential parts of a handgun. These same parts would exist on pretty much every handgun, at least of this semi-automatic type. So let me start by pointing out a few of them. This one comes with a standard 21 round magazine. Comes from factory just like that. You can buy a similar version that comes with a 17 round magazine that fits flush. And so it comes with a 21 or 17 round magazine. It has a standard full-size grip. It has a factory trigger, which has a pull weight of about 7 pounds or so. Has front and rear iron sights that are used to aim the firearm. It has this little takedown lever, which is small, and you may have trouble seeing it, but we're going to talk about that some later. And that's what you use to remove the slide and disassemble the firearm. And the entire gun is designed around the automatic cycling mechanism. That is, when you pull the trigger and fire a round, right when that happens, it automatically will rack the slide back, eject the round, the spent cartridge out of the gun. It will grab a new round out of the magazine, put that round into the chamber, into the barrel, and it'll be ready to fire another round the next time you pull the trigger. So this is a semi-automatic firearm. Now, I want to use this handgun to illustrate first California and the majority's argument as applied to this obviously typical and very common handgun, and then I want to show you that the same argument would apply to other parts of the firearm and to this firearm as a whole. Now, as a reminder, California's argument, which the majority's adopted here, is that a magazine that holds more than 10 rounds is not an arm protected by the Second Amendment. So this 21 round magazine that comes from the factory or a 17 round magazine is not an arm protected by the Second Amendment. Now, California acknowledges that a magazine is necessary to make the firearm function, but they argue that because you can replace the standard magazine with one that holds fewer rounds, 10 rounds or less, then these higher capacity magazines are not an arm and thus wholly unprotected by the Second Amendment. Now, the problem with California's argument is that, as I pointed out in oral argument, the exact same argument would apply to essentially every part on this firearm, which would mean that essentially nothing on this firearm would be protected by the Second Amendment. Allow me to illustrate that using this firearm. Now, in oral argument, I asked California's counsel if their argument meant that the sights on this firearm are not protected by the Second Amendment. And part of the reason I'm making this video is because it didn't appear that counsel understood what I was asking. So take a look again at this handgun. What you see on here are iron sights. You have a front and a rear iron sight. And the way that you fire this handgun, the way you aim it, is you take and you line up these two sights and you line them up on what you want to shoot at. And that's how you hit what you're aiming at with this firearm. These are iron sights. They're probably the most common sighting system for a handgun. But all you have to do on this particular handgun to change out the sights is remove two screws in this slide right here, and the back sight comes off. And when you do that, you can put the two screws back into a red dot optic, and now you will have a firearm that instead of having iron sights would have a red dot optic. Let me illustrate that by just taking a slide where I've already installed the red dot optic, and here you go. See, so now you have this back iron sight's been taken off, and here's a red dot optic. Now, in the hands of an experienced shooter, this red dot optic allows you to shoot the firearm more quickly, to get on target more quickly, to hit what you're aiming at, be more accurate. And so it's obviously much more dangerous if it's being used for an unlawful or wrong purpose. But if it's being used for a lawful purpose, then it makes the firearm better for that intended purpose. So this firearm would be better for self-defense or competition, recreational shooting, or hunting. And indeed, my own self-defense handgun, which this is another P320 that's been configured slightly differently, has a red dot optic precisely because it makes the firearm better for its intended purpose, that is self-defense. It makes it more accurate more quickly. and shoot more quickly. Now, so in that sense, this red dot optic is just like this magazine. It makes the firearm more dangerous when it's misused, but it also makes the firearm work better for its intended purpose when it's used properly. Well, you may think that's pretty intuitive about the sighting system for a firearm, but the same thing is true about basically every part of this gun. Let's take a look at a part that's maybe a little less intuitive, which is that takedown lever that I talked about earlier. This little piece here, it's necessary for the operation of the firearm. It's a tiny little piece that you need to have for the firearm. And so you would think, well, since it's necessary, then it must be an arm protected by the Second Amendment. But not under California's logic in this case. See, you can replace this factory takedown lever with a different factory takedown lever. This one's called a gas pedal. And when you do that, you replace it, you put the slide back on. Now the firearm is a lot more controllable under recoil. You can, just like with the red dot sight, you can do faster follow-up shots. You can aim the gun more quickly, and you can control it better. So again, as with the red dot sight, as with the higher capacity magazine, this particular takedown lever makes the gun more dangerous when it's misused, but also makes the gun more effective for its intended purpose when it's used properly. So under California's logic, because this is an accessory, this little takedown lever, and could be replaced with a worse part, this little takedown lever is not protected. It's not part of the arm protected by the Second Amendment. Well, you might ask yourself, well, what about the grip? Like, you think this grip, certainly it must be part of the arm. I mean, it seems like that's a pretty key part of a firearm, is the grip of a pistol. Well, actually, under the majority's argument, it would not be protected. And the reason is, here's a bunch of grips that I've accumulated over the years. I'm just going to pull a couple out here. This is a nice small grip, a nice small light grip. This is a big heavy grip. So what you can do on this firearm is you can remove the slide, remove that takedown lever, take what's called the fire control unit out of the firearm. This is actually the firearm under the ATF's definition. And you can take this fire control lever and you can put it inside this smaller grip. And you could use this grip for, say, self-defense purposes, because it's very concealable, it's light, it's easy to carry. And indeed, you'll see that's pretty much the type of grip that I have on my self-defense firearm. Or you could take this much heavier grip with aggressive stippling on it and with a flared mag well, and you could put this fire control unit in there, put the takedown lever on, and then you put the slide back on, and now you have a firearm that is much better at being able to take quick follow-up shots, hit what you're aiming at. And so this grip, all of these grips under the majority in California's logic, could be banned because if they were misused, they would make the firearm more dangerous, and you could put a different type of grip on if you wanted to. So you might ask yourself, well, what part of this pistol would be protected as an arm under the majority's logic? Well, I suppose California would eventually be forced to say, well, this part, the FCU, I guess, is the arm protected by the Second Amendment. Every other part that you added, as I've just shown you, every other part that you added could easily be characterized, just like the magazine, as an accessory that you add to the firearm, and therefore could be banned under the Second Amendment. But not so fast. Even this part, the FCU, the core basic part of the firearm, could be banned under the majority's rationale. And the reason is, let me show you another FCU. This is the FCU for my competition gun. It has a really nice trigger, a nice light, crisp trigger, and has some parts replaced in here. It makes for a really nice trigger. You can upgrade the trigger to make it much nicer. And so, because of that, under the majority's logic, you could even ban this FCU, or at least most of it, as simply an accessory, and now protected by the Second Amendment. Now, most of what I've shown you could, I suppose, be conceptualized as upgrades. You say, well, that's an upgraded trigger, and that's an upgraded takedown lever, and that's an upgraded grip. But the majority's logic works both ways. I've just shown you how you could easily improve the sights, how you could easily improve the takedown lever, you can improve the grip and the trigger, you could do the same thing with the barrel. But you could easily downgrade all of these factory parts of the handgun to make the firearm less accurate and slower. You could put in worse than factory trigger. You could require worse sights than what it comes with from the factory. You could require a grip be put on that hurts the speed and accuracy. Indeed, this type of downgrade is precisely what the majority is actually requiring in this case. As we mentioned earlier, this comes from the factory with a 21-round magazine, or it comes with a 17-round magazine in a slightly different configuration. But the majority is requiring that these factory standard parts be replaced with worse than factory parts, a 10-round magazine. So when we take everything off that the majority might call it accessory, what we're left with at best is this fire control unit. And as I've explained, even that could be dumbed down so that much of this fire control unit would be an accessory under California's argument. And of course, you can't shoot this, right? It's inoperable. You need all the other accessories that I've been describing in order to make this work as a firearm. But of course, also each of these other pieces, just like this magazine, could in some way be considered an accessory, since they could be replaced with a different part that would be less useful and make the gun less dangerous if misused. And that could be said for pretty much every single part of this handgun. And the same problem with the majority's argument applies to other aspects of the firearm that are less easily shown in the video, including fundamental aspects of how this firearm operates. At oral argument, I asked California's counsel why California couldn't ban the automatic cycling mechanism altogether under California's argument. And again, I don't think he understood what I was talking about. Well, this handgun uses that mechanism. This uses the automatic cycling mechanism. And this semi-automatic auto-loading operation is the most popular mechanism that exists today and is used for self-defense. But other mechanisms exist for handguns, including, probably most obviously, the revolver mechanism. Here's a revolver. Think of the six-shooter from the old Western movies, right? You can have a revolver which is not automatic. Or you could have, and there's different types of revolvers. There's single shots, there's double actions. You could have the lever action, you could have a pump action, you could have a single shot break action, which only has one round. You have to open it up and manually take the round out and put another in. And under California's argument, because any of these single types of mechanisms are not essential to make this handgun work, and thus, or make a handgun work, and thus are not an arm under the Second Amendment, California could ban the whole semi-automatic mechanism altogether, thereby effectively banning semi-automatic handguns altogether, forcing everyone to use revolvers or single-shot handguns or worse. And of course, with bad sights, crazy heavy trigger pulls, a terrible grip, you get the point. Ultimately, California's argument, which the majority has unwisely adopted here, is based on the unstated assumption that there's some basic, I guess, unadorned, without any accessories firearm that would be protected as an arm under the text of the Second Amendment, but everything else is merely an unprotected accessory that's been added to that firearm that's not protected. And I hope you can tell from this video that that idea is simply unrealistic and could never be applied in real life. Like many of this court's ideas about the Second Amendment, it stems from a basic misunderstanding of how firearms work, combined with a highly unrealistic idea of how such a rule would be administered in real life. Ultimately, the only rule that makes sense and comports with reality and the text of the Constitution is that the entire handgun here, including the grip, this takedown lever, the slide and barrel, the sighting system, and this magazine are all part of the arm within the meaning of the Second Amendment. Thank you for watching.